Deep in the Florida Everglades, buried beneath sawgrass and silence, lies a 2-mile runway that was supposed to change everything. It was built for planes that could fly faster than sound, for an America that believed nothing was impossible. But the jets never came, the terminals were never built, and the dream died before it could take flight. It was 1968, and America was unstoppable. We had our eyes on the moon. Our factories were building the biggest passenger plane the world had ever seen. And in boardrooms across the country, men in narrow ties were drawing up plans for a future that glittered with chrome and speed. The jet age had arrived, but it wasn't enough. We wanted to go faster, higher, further than anyone thought possible. Do you remember what it felt like to fly back then? Air travel wasn't just transportation, it was an event. You'd dress up in your Sunday best. Women wore heels and gloves, men put on suits and ties. Stewardesses served real meals on china plates with actual silverware. The cabin smelled like cigarette smoke and perfume and possibility. Flying was still new enough to feel like magic, and we were hungry for more of it. Pan American had just ordered 6 Concordes from Britain and France, and that stung. How could America, the nation that invented the airplane, the nation sending men to the moon, let Europe lead the way in supersonic travel? President Kennedy had already thrown down the gauntlet, demanding that American engineers build something better, something bigger, something impossibly fast. And Boeing answered with the 2707. The Boeing 2707 wasn't just an airplane. It was a promise wrapped in titanium and stainless steel, a machine designed to fly at Mach 3, nearly 1,800 miles per hour. It would carry almost 300 passengers in elegant comfort while breaking the sound barrier 3 times over. The designers envisioned spacious cabins with panoramic windows, cocktail lounges, and seats that reclined like living room furniture. This wasn't going to be just another airliner. This was going to redefine what it meant to travel. Airlines were lining up to buy it. Pan Am wanted it. TWA wanted it. Alitalia, Qantas, and 24 other carriers placed orders for 122 aircraft before a single prototype was built. Can you imagine that kind of faith in the future? These airlines were betting billions on a plane that existed only on paper and in the imaginations of dreamers. But here's the problem with flying faster than sound over land. The sonic boom, that thunderous crack that follows a supersonic jet, it rattles windows and scares livestock and makes people angry. So if you're going to build an airport for supersonic jets, you need to put it somewhere remote, somewhere the boom can happen over open water where nobody will complain. And that's how the eyes of progress turned toward the Everglades. The Dade County Port Authority bought 39 square miles of swampland, a vast stretch of sawgrass and cypress trees located 36 miles west of Miami, right in the heart of one of America's most unique ecosystems. They called it the Everglades Jetport, and the plans they unveiled were breathtaking. 6 massive runways, each nearly 2 miles long. A futuristic terminal building gleaming with glass and steel. High-speed monorails connecting the airport to Miami on one coast and to the Gulf of Mexico on the other. A 1,000-foot wide corridor cutting through the wilderness, carrying highways and rail lines and the dreams of millions of future travelers. The architectural renderings looked like something from a science fiction magazine. Soaring, curved roof lines, walls of tinted glass, moving walkways carrying passengers through climate-controlled corridors. The terminal would be a cathedral of the jet age, a place where travelers could watch these magnificent supersonic birds take flight while sipping cocktails in air-conditioned comfort. Director of the Dade County Port Authority stood before reporters and declared this airport would accommodate even the most optimistic forecasts for air travel. It would be 5 times the size of JFK International Airport in New York, the largest airport on planet Earth. Communities along Florida's Gulf coast were thrilled. Real estate developers saw dollar signs. The Mach brothers, who were building communities on Marco Island, predicted the jetport would make their remote paradise the nucleus of one of the most thriving areas in the country. Local newspapers ran excited editorials about the economic boom that was coming. Small towns imagined themselves transforming into bustling suburbs. Farmers looked at their land and saw future shopping centers. Everyone wanted a piece of the prosperity that this airport promised to deliver. In those optimistic days, it seemed like the only question was how fast Florida could grow, not whether it should. Construction began with tremendous fanfare in 1968. Workers poured concrete in the sweltering heat, carving civilization out of wilderness. By 1969, they had completed the first runway, a massive strip of pavement stretching east to west across the wetlands. Test pilots brought in jets for practice landings, their engines screaming across the sawgrass. For a brief, shining moment, it looked like the future was actually happening. Picture those construction workers, their shirts soaked with sweat, wrestling heavy equipment through mud and standing water. They were building something important, something that would last. Their children would grow up and tell stories about how Dad helped build the world's greatest airport. At night, they'd go home to their families and talk about the progress they were making, about the massive project taking shape in the swamp. But not everyone was celebrating. Environmental scientists looked at the plans and felt a growing sense of dread. The Everglades wasn't just a swamp. It was a living, breathing ecosystem that provided drinking water for all of South Florida. It was home to endangered panthers and rare birds and plants found nowhere else on Earth. And it was fragile, so terribly fragile that even small changes could trigger an ecological collapse. Dr. Luna Leopold, a respected wildlife conservationist and hydrologist, was asked by the Nixon administration to study the jetport's potential impact. He brought in Arthur Marshall, a well-known Florida ecologist, and together they produced a report that would change everything. Development of the proposed jetport and its attendant facilities, they wrote, will lead to land drainage and development for agriculture, transportation, and services in the Big Cypress Swamp, which will inexorably destroy the South Florida ecosystem and thus the Everglades National Park. The word inexorably hit like a bomb. Not might destroy, not could potentially harm, would inexorably destroy. There was no middle ground, no compromise. The scientists were saying that if this airport was built, one of America's greatest natural treasures would die, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Suddenly, people who had never thought about the Everglades before were writing angry letters to their congressmen. Hunters joined forces with environmentalists. Marjory Stoneman Douglas, the suffragette and conservationist who had devoted her life to protecting the Everglades, rallied opposition with a passion that couldn't be ignored. She was in her 70s by then, a tiny woman with fierce determination and a gift for making people see what they were about to lose. Even Florida's Governor, Claude Kirk, who had initially supported the project, changed his mind when protest mail started running 50-1 against the airport. The debate became heated, sometimes bitter. Supporters of the jetport accused environmentalists of standing in the way of progress, of wanting to keep Florida backward and poor. How could a swamp be more important than jobs and prosperity? But the opposition kept growing, fueled by a dawning awareness that maybe, just maybe, there were some things more valuable than another airport. At the same time, the supersonic dream itself was starting to crack. Boeing's engineers were running into problems with the 2707 that no amount of optimism could solve. The swing wing design, that radical feature that was supposed to give the plane incredible performance, turned out to be too heavy. The aircraft couldn't carry enough payload to be profitable. Boeing went back to the drawing board, scrapping the swing wings in favor of a more conventional Delta design, but the costs kept climbing and the delays kept mounting. Every month brought new setbacks. The titanium skin was proving harder to work with than expected. The engines weren't delivering the promised performance. The weight kept creeping upward. Boeing engineers worked around the clock, trying to salvage the project, but the problems multiplied faster than the solutions. And then there was the sonic boom. The very thing that made the Everglades location attractive turned into the project's biggest liability. People living under Concorde flight paths in Europe were complaining bitterly about the noise. In America, where personal property rights run deep, the idea of jets rattling dishes and cracking windows several times a day was politically toxic. Congress started asking hard questions about whether supersonic flight over the United States should be allowed at all. By 1970, the writing was on the wall. Environmental concerns, economic doubts, and technological challenges had converged into an unstoppable force. Construction on the Everglades Jetport was officially halted after completion of just that single runway. The grand terminal would never be built. The monorails would never run. The other 5 runways would remain lines on paper, dreams that never touched the ground. 1 year later, in 1971, Congress pulled the plug on the Boeing 2707 program entirely. After spending roughly $1 billion in 1971 money, after securing orders from airlines around the world, after building full-size mock-ups, and employing thousands of workers, the project was canceled. The aircraft that was supposed to dominate the skies never flew a single passenger. Boeing, which had bet so heavily on supersonic transport, was left reeling. The economic impact on Seattle was so severe that someone put up a billboard asking the last person leaving town to please turn out the lights. Families who had moved to Seattle for jobs on the SST project found themselves unemployed. Engineers who had dedicated years to the program watched their work get scrapped. The mock-up they'd built, that beautiful full-scale model of America's supersonic future, was dismantled and hauled away to storage. It must have felt like watching a funeral for tomorrow. The Everglades Jetport site didn't die completely, though. It was quietly renamed the Dade Collier Training and Transition Airport, and for decades, that lone runway served as a training ground for airline pilots. Pan Am and Eastern Airlines would send their crews out to the middle of the Everglades to practice touch-and-go landings in 747s and DC-10s and Lockheed TriStars. In the silence of the night, you could watch these massive aircraft descending through the darkness, their landing lights cutting through the humid air, their engines roaring across the empty swamp. Pilots liked training there because the runway was long and the location was remote. They could practice emergency procedures without worrying about bothering anyone. But there were no ticket counters, no baggage claim, no restaurants or gift shops or the bustle of travelers hurrying to catch their flights. Just a runway and some basic facilities, a ghost of what was supposed to be the greatest airport in the world. Today, if you drive west from Miami on the Tamiami Trail, you can still find that runway. It sits there in the heat and the humidity, slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness around it. Weeds push through cracks in the concrete. Alligators sun themselves near. The edges, the sawgrass waves in the breeze, indifferent to human ambition. In 1974, President Gerald Ford established Big Cypress National Preserve, protecting the very land that was supposed to become a concrete metropolis. The environmental movement that gained strength fighting the jetport went on to protect wild places across America. Marjory Stoneman Douglas became a legend, fighting for the Everglades until she died at the age of 108. The battle over the jetport, it turned out, wasn't really about an airport at all. It was about what kind of future America wanted. The Boeing 2707 mock-up, or what's left of it, sits in a museum in Seattle now, a monument to technological ambition that outran practical reality. The Concorde flew for 27 years before being retired, never quite living up to its promise, always too expensive and too loud to be anything more than a luxury for the wealthy. The supersonic age we were promised in D.C., the 1960s, never really arrived. We chose bigger planes over faster ones, more passengers over more speed, economy over glamour. And yet, standing on that abandoned runway in the Everglades, you can almost see it. The gleaming terminals, the monorails sliding silently toward the coast, the supersonic jets, their needle noses pointed toward the sky, ready to carry passengers to distant cities in half the time it takes today. You can almost hear the announcements echoing through vast concourses, the excitement of travelers about to experience the future of flight. It's a powerful thing, nostalgia for a future that never happened. We look back at the 1960s and see an America that believed it could do anything, that saw every problem as solvable and every dream as achievable. The Everglades Jetport was born from that optimism, that absolute certainty that tomorrow would be bigger and better and faster than today. Those were the days when a president could announce, "We'd go to the moon," and everyone believed him. When engineers could sketch impossible machines on napkins and investors would line up to fund them. When the future wasn't something to fear, but something to race toward with open arms. The jetport was supposed to be part of that bright tomorrow. Maybe we were naive. Maybe we underestimated the cost, both financial and environmental, of the future we imagined. Or maybe we just weren't ready. The technology wasn't quite there. The economics didn't work. The world wasn't asking for what we were offering. But here's what we learned. We learned that progress isn't just about going faster or building bigger. We learned that some places are too precious to pave over, too important to sacrifice for convenience. We learned that the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we choose, and sometimes the wisest choice is to say no, even when everyone around you is saying yes. Sometimes looking back at what we didn't build tells us as much about who we are as looking at what we did. The Everglades Jetport was a dream that died so something more important could live. What memories do you have of the jet age? Did you or someone you love ever work in aviation during those optimistic years? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, and please let us know what other forgotten corners of American history you'd like us to explore.